call the February 28th meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. First order of business is Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have minutes to consider from the January meeting. We're all kind of drowning in paper, so excuse us if we're disorganized. Oh, yes, right, sorry. Did anybody have any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
A motion to approve.
Second.
Speak into the microphone.
And Bill seconded. Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay, the variance is not being held tonight. That has been held over to the March meeting due to the request from the applicant. So at this point, we're going to open the appeal.
No,
No, we're
we're going to
not.
approve the agenda.
I thought we approved that.
We have to approve the agenda.
I'm sorry, what?
We have to approve the agenda.
Oh, sorry, I forgot the agenda. Is there any addition to the agenda?
Yes. I would like to propose that prior to the public hearing, we have a discussion, the board, involving the process questions that I've given you all, which has been something that we've been dealing with in order to come to this meeting tonight and make some sort of a decision. And there are some questions here that need to be answered. So I would ask for that. And I would also ask that we remove the closed meeting option, in that my feeling is that there's nothing that's going to be done tonight that needs to be discussed in closed session. Too much has been discussed behind closed doors on this, and I will not participate in a closed discussion.
And how does the rest of...
If we're going to do anything on this process issue, we really need to do it after we've rendered a decision on this appeal, and that these poor people speak and go home.
The reason that I wanted to do it before is that there are items on this issue which have been addressed we've gotten many letters on this. And the issues that I have on here, for the most part, are not issues that we can address in the public hearing in our decision that's to be made. So people being aware of that, when they get up to speak, they will know that, and we would ask them, please don't speak about some of these issues, because we can't consider them at this point. And we want as many people to speak as possible. And also, during the public hearing, if people have written a letter already, we should ask them, we have gotten the letter, and...
Right here, got them all. Yep.
What?
We have all the letters right here.
No, what I'm saying is that if they have written a letter, there's no need for them, because we have read the letters, for them to stand up and repeat what they have written in the letters, that we have already have that information. And that is done, it is done in many localities, and that otherwise the process could go on for hours.
Well, the process will go on for hours if we do this process question before we have the public hearing. It's just,
Yes, we do. We have a public hearing. Okay, let's kind of ratchet it down. So the way this is going to proceed is we are going to have the appellant speak first, 30 minutes for the appellant.
we have to approve the agenda.
Okay, can I get approval of the agenda?
As what?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. Okay.
You can address this
Yeah, another time.
instead of having a closed meeting. We'll just address this and then not close the meeting.
Okay, to go back over the process. The appellant will, there's 30 minutes for each of the parties. The appellant will speak for 30 minutes. She needs to reserve part of that time for rebuttal. The same for the zoning administrator, and reserve part-time for rebuttal. And if there is the aggrieved party, which I assume would be Mr. Taylor. No, she's not the aggrieved party. Well,
Yes, she is.
That's not what my lawyer says.
For the presentations, not Sharon, can we open the presentations the time as well?
Do we have an opening
I said,
presentation?
what the timing, I'm keeping the time, I'm wondering what the.
Well, I'm trying to get through it.
Okay, couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, back to business. The appellant will get 30 minutes, part-time, she needs to reserve for rebuttal. The zoning administrator will get 30 minutes, part-time to reserve for rebuttal. The aggrieved party, which I think is where I left it off, Mr. Taylor or his attorney will get the same. And then the Board of Zoning Appeals will ask questions, and then we will go into an open hearing, a public hearing. And you are constrained to 5 minutes, and if you could do it in less time, that would be awesome. Okay.
What is your order of, the normal order would be that the zoning administrator makes her presentation, then the
You
appellant.
know what, you can find it both ways, if you want to look around. But let's stick with the way I said, please. Thank you. Are we ready? Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen of the BZA, thank you so much for your time. I know it's been a difficult few weeks because there's actually been a lot of interest in this, maybe more than some of us expected, but thank you. I'm speaking tonight in support of the appeal of Ms. Sally Haynes. She's asked that I serve as her agent this evening. She had intended to speak tonight on her own behalf, and I had agreed to be available to answer technical questions for her, but we've been told the BZA rules allow only one party to speak on behalf of the appellant, so therefore Ms. Haynes has asked that I assume this role tonight. I have to say, though, as her agent this evening, I am acting only in a lay capacity. I'm a retired attorney and my license is not active. So I wish to be very clear that nothing I offer or say tonight or in any capacity as my agent for Ms. Haynes is intended in any manner to provide legal advice or a legal opinion from an attorney licensed to practice law in Virginia. It is purely my personal views on the subject. Nonetheless, I do believe I'm right. I've researched this in some depth, but of course I'll leave that up to the discretion of the BZA to decide. I'd also like to say on behalf of both myself and Ms. Haynes that we are all neighbors. The fact that we're on different sides of the matter doesn't diminish my respect for or appreciation of our dedicated staff or others here tonight with a position different than mine or Ms. Haynes. As my good friend Aileen Johnson likes to say, and many of you have probably heard it from her, we can disagree without being disagreeable. While I don't always manage that as well as I might like, I think she's of course right, and I will strive to live up to her standards. Tonight, the BZA has one purpose and one purpose only: to decide if the November 9th decision is correct, as required by Virginia Code 15.2-23091. It is apparent that the November 9th decision is not and cannot be found correct, because the zoning administrator has no authority to declare a right-of-way provision voided or unenforceable, as that decision attempts to do. This is the fundamental issue that must be addressed by the BZA tonight. The Supreme Court of Virginia has made this matter very clear with the following statement, and I quote, "The authority of zoning administrators and boards of zoning appeals is prescribed by statute. No statute confers the authority to rule on the validity of zoning ordinances upon zoning administrators or boards of zoning appeals. While zoning administrators and boards of zoning appeals must necessarily interpret zoning ordinances to execute their responsibilities, that obligation does not give rise to a power to declare those ordinances invalid. That is a determination within the sole province of the judiciary." That's from Town of Jonesville versus Powell Valley Village Limited Partnership, Supreme Court of Virginia, 1997. Because the zoning administrator lacks this authority, it is the duty of the BZA to reverse the November 9th decision, and we ask the BZA to do that tonight. The history of this provision extends back many years. It was passed in 1990, but as far back as the 1970s and 1980s, and actually the 60s, heated discussions were being had about protecting our countryside and safeguarding the safety and rural characters of county roads. Names that many of us are familiar with as the grandfathers of Rappahannock zoning, although maybe they'd cringe if they knew they were being talked about that way now. Names like Dick Menier, who was a renowned planner, Newbill Miller, Doug Bumgardner, Werner Krebser, and others, several of whom are still around here in our county. These are the people who crafted and enacted these protections. And these restrictions, which were very intentionally put into place more than 3 decades ago, have worked remarkably well. We still have our open and forested landscapes, which enhance our quality of life, as well as supporting our increasingly important status as a gateway community to the Shenandoah National Park. The provisions reflected our land use realities then and now. They addressed the small, narrow, highly scenic roads that crisscross our county, roads that are the epitome of all we want to preserve. We know these roads. We live on them. We drive them all the time. We know they're steep, they're winding, they're narrow. They have hills that you can't see around. They have streams that you cross, sometimes with a bridge, maybe occasionally not with a bridge. They're beautiful. People walk on them, they ride bikes on them. These roads are our county. Woodward Road is a prime example of this. It's a little unusual because of its proximity to the village of Sperryville, so it's got more attention than the other roads, but nonetheless, it's narrow. It's 16 feet at its widest point around the home of Miss Haynes. It has bottlenecks, extreme bottlenecks on either end. On the Estes Mill side, that road quickly descends a steep hill with hairpin turns. It crosses a narrow bridge on the Thornton River and ends abruptly at Highway 211. If this road had to be widened, at least a few homes might have to come out. It's unclear what would happen to the old Estes Mill, now Appalachia Brewery, or that iconic old corn crib that is photographed so often, or the small, long-standing roadside stands directly across 211. What is clear is that it would be costly, controversial, and time-consuming, and in the meantime, dangerous road conditions would be created with traffic that road cannot handle. The other end of Woodward Road is worse. From Miss Haynes' house, it descends a very steep hill with high banks or a steep drop-off on either side. 2 cars cannot pass. If the road had to be widened, several historic homes would have to be taken out, the hill would likely have to be graded, and then what? It ends abruptly onto Main Street of Sperryville that cannot possibly handle any substantial new traffic. The leaders who put these right-of-way provisions in place made sure that our comprehensive plan also reflects special protections for our secondary roads. There are numerous references to protecting our secondary roads in the comprehensive plan, some of which we included in our prior written materials, so I'll just read one. That comes from page 98 under future transportation planning, and again I quote, "The rural character of many of the county's secondary roads is important to preserving the agricultural and natural feel of the county. Roads that lack hard surfaces, that are narrow, or that meander over the landscape, or all three, are integral parts of the fabric of the county. Secondary road improvements in the county shall recognize the needs of public safety and convenience. In many instances, citizens prefer gravel roads as a means of traffic calming and congruence with nature. Yet, in its finding that the right-of-way provisions are absurd, the November 9th decision did not mention these important land use goals or the provisions of our comprehensive plan that support protecting the safety and rural character of our secondary roads. The state code certainly doesn't point to these provisions as being absurd. We listed many of these code provisions in our previous written material, so I won't go through them all now, but just for context, I'll mention Virginia Code 15.2-2283, for example, which is a major section for enabling zoning ordinances for localities, and that requires that zoning ordinances must be for the purposes of promoting the health, safety, or general welfare of the public, and specifically must consider a number of things, a few of which are providing convenience of access and safety from fire, floods, and other dangers, reducing or preventing congestion on public streets, facilitating the adequate provision of fire protection, disaster evacuation and transportation, and protection against overcrowding of land. Again, these are just a few of them. Yet again, the November 9th decision does not acknowledge state authorities which demonstrate the reasonableness and lawfulness of these provisions. Our county leaders place these provisions prominently in our county code, our individual Rappahannock code, and in our subdivision codes. They are not a hidden or a buried sentence of code as the November 9th decision would have us believe. Instead, they are conspicuously incorporated into the zoning designations themselves. Section 170-37 of our zoning code is a section of our ordinance that establishes all zoning classifications and their basic use requirements. The following section, 170-38, is called Use Limitations. This section identifies a number of limitations on zoning designations, most notably of which are the right-of-way restrictions in question tonight. Section 170-37, the use regulations, consists of a chart. Across the top are the various zoning districts, ag, conservation, RR5, R2, RV, whatever, and down the side are the use regulations. These are maximum density, minimum lot sizes and width, yard and road setbacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But under maximum density on that side, which is defined as the maximum number of dwelling units per acre, the maximum number of houses you can have per acre, it includes a reference which says, for maximum density, see sections 170-22 and 170-38. Again, 170-38 are the use limitations for zoning classifications, which include the right-of-way ordinances. Therefore, anybody wondering what a zoning designation meant, such as RR5, would see that it has a maximum density of one house per every 5 acres, but that density may and likely will be reduced by multiple factors. Specifically, if you wish to create lots that will access onto a narrow, constrained secondary road, your density will be greatly reduced unless an adequate public right-of-way can be obtained, or you can find other access, such as directly onto a primary highway. Other restrictions may also apply to a given lot, especially reduction for steep slopes or floodplains, or large bodies of water, as contained in 170-22, the other code section specifically referenced under maximum density. So claims in the November 9th decision that the right-of-way provisions nullify or strip away rights broadly granted through entire chapters of the zoning and subdivision ordinances show a fundamental misunderstanding of our zoning ordinance and the zoning classifications. So what does this all boil down to? Simply this: there are good reasons behind why a zoning administrator is not delegated the authority to overturn or invalidate zoning ordinances. Our Virginia State Code imposes a lengthy and detailed process for the enactment or amendment of a zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission has to propose it, then hold public hearings with notice and comment, then vote on it and forward it to the Board of Supervisors. Then the Board of Supervisors goes through the process all over again. It considers it, the Planning Commission recommendations, it holds more public hearings, and finally votes on whether or not to enact it into law. This is an intentionally detailed, multi-layer process which may take months or years, involve work sessions, newspaper articles, letters to the editor, detailed staff and attorney review, etc. That is what is required to enact or change a zoning ordinance that deeply affects people's homes and investments. Once an ordinance has been duly enacted, it can be amended only by the Board of Supervisors through the same rigorous statutory procedures or overturned by a court. As the Supreme Court of Virginia has unequivocally stated, the authority to invalidate an ordinance is not vested in an appointed zoning administrator. For that reason, the November 9th decision must be reversed by the BZA. We therefore respectfully urge each member of the BZA to do your duty tonight and to reverse the November 9th decision. Thank you very much.
Michelle?
Madam Chair, my name is Art Goff. I'm the county attorney, and Michelle has asked me to make a brief presentation in advance of what she will be telling you tonight. If that please the board, I'd like to start by saying thank you. Boy, this is really well attended tonight. It's a pleasure to see so many people involved. I respectfully disagree with Ms. Ishii. It was an excellent presentation. What the zoning administrator is confronted with is the enforcement of this right-of-way provision that's in 138 that is incapable of enforcement because none of these right-of-ways exist. There's no such thing as a 50-foot wide public secondary road right-of-way with one small and not very long exception on Chester Gap Road. What that has the effect of doing is it nullifies the zoning maps. Anything that's in residential is precluded from further subdivision. Every single residential district by the operation of this, if applied as it's written. Now, what that means is that the whole goal of the comprehensive plan, i.e. confining rural residential development to the vicinity of the villages, is absolutely out the window. It can't be done. So what I'm saying is, as Ms. Ishii pointed out, this board nor the zoning administrator has the right to nullify or invalidate an ordinance. That does take the Board of Supervisors to amend it, or a court. But that's not what's happening here. We're saying we can't enforce it because it doesn't exist. That's like asking a blind man to tell you what he sees out the window. He can't do it. Under no circumstance could an applicant, such as Mr. Taylor, satisfy the requirement because it's not there. It's the position of the zoning administrator that that's not the intention of this statute, i.e. to nullify the comprehensive plan and to make it impossible for a subdividable lot that's in a residential district to be further subdivided, which is a by right use. You can have 5 acres. So if you got 10 acres and you're an RR5, or as Mr. Taylor's case, he's got 30 acres and it's in RR5, he can subdivide, provided that he meets all the other requirements. So one of the jobs of the zoning administrator is not just to say, no, reject it. The other part of that is if you've got a defective plat, Part 2 under 15.2, 2259A1 is for her, or him, as the case shall be, identify modifications or corrections as will permit approval of the plat. She can't do that under this ordinance because there's no remedy for the lot owner, none whatsoever. Because the writs of the right-of-way simply do not exist. It can't be applied. It can't be enforced. There's nothing to enforce. Now, when a zoning administrator gets a plat, what she's doing is she's going to check it for lot size, it doesn't meet the minimums there, setbacks, slope, etc. If there's a defect in the plat that's submitted, then she makes these suggestions. You can come back with another plat that, hey, now your setbacks are where they're supposed to be. That can't be done here. Now, it's absurd to require someone to do something or to present a plat that can't be supported at all. It's also absurd that this 150-foot right-of-way requirement should eviscerate the whole scheme that all the folks that Ms. Ishii was talking about envisioned. The villages are the place for these smaller lots, not out in the country. The irony of this particular application is on Woodard Road, the larger tract owner to the north and west, I think it's maybe a 300-acre parcel, has got division rights that would enable, if they wanted to, 2-acre lots in ag all along Woodard Road. Completely and totally defeating this whole idea. Mr. Taylor's case, as Ms. Summers had to confront, was he's asking for 2 divisions. We're talking about 2 houses on an erstwhile public road where anybody can come and go as they please, as many times as they please, whether they're driving a school bus, a tractor trailer, a tractor, a station wagon, whatever. Anybody can come and go. It's a public road. Now, one of the interesting letters I got was from a law firm representing one of the environmental groups, and I'm sure you all have received that. And they're in that letter, they're talking about, you know, the law is absurd if it can't be harmonized with the rest of the whole body of law. You can't just pick and choose a word, a phrase, and the whole thing is then considered in that little thing is considered in isolation without regard to the rest of it. So the rest of it is we got these zoning districts, albeit they're in crayon, literally, and they're not susceptible to easy parcel identification or partial parcel identification because of that. But nonetheless, we have it. The intention of the board of supervisors that adopted that in 1990, well, I've heard lots of stories out there on the street. I don't know if Mr. Brown wants to brief you on any of that, but that it was really designed not to impose this burden on residential development, but yet to kill a development out on Harris Hollow Road. That's why it was, I'm arguing to you, was ill-considered, because it has, the way it's written, this effect. They could have picked 30 foot, okay? That'd be consistent with the Byrd Act. But they picked 50. Whether they knew at the time that 50-foot right-of-ways on public secondary roads didn't even exist, we can only speculate, okay? But nonetheless, I expect that Ms. Shell Summers tonight is going to tell you that she's researched this in detail. I know Ms. Luke, I saw Ms. Luke come in earlier. She had also looked at the maps, and I think her count was about 54 parcels were affected by this. I think Ms. Ishii's count was around 60. Is that right, Ms. Ishii?
Under 60.
Yeah. Our count was 49. So 49 parcels that are subdividable by right in rural residential districts would be affected by this. To apply the statute literally would be essentially to take away those by right subdivision rights of these property owners. With one little tiny sentence in a spot under the division limitation section, which I think was either ill-considered or unintentional. Because how could that be? How could a reasonable board of supervisors say, I mean, this is not up for fairly debatable standard because it doesn't exist. I mean, you can't make the case. They use the word right-of-way. So they're not talking about road safety. Right-of-ways don't entail even the right to vehicular traffic, just a right of ingress and egress on your pony or you're on foot or in a vehicle. So that's another reason why this statute, as it's written, can't be enforced. A right-of-way, what's going to happen? So it was suggested, well, a property owner could create a right-of-way and burden the other parcels that are subdivided and create a road that then leads to a primary. Well, the problem with that is, technically, if you do that for one, the next lot over is off-site road development, which the Supreme Court says you can't require. You can't require off-site road improvements as a condition of your by right use. And so we create that. Who's to say VDOT's going to accept it, make it a public right-of-way? And who's to say that the Board of Supervisors is going to accept it into the county road system? So here again, we're dealing with the concept of impossibility leads to absurdity. So from an enforcement standpoint, Ms. Summers' decision is exactly correct and well considered. That is, we can't enforce this particular right-of-way with provision as it applies to these residential parcels that are in residential zoning until further action of the Board of Supervisors. But right now, her hands are tied. She can't impose an impossible requirement on an applicant. I thank you very much for your attention.
Questions? Michelle, do you want to speak?
I will try to keep this brief. Mr. Goff put everything perfectly. I would note that, a lot of thought and time was put into this and not just a rash decision was made. I've never said the code is invalid. I said it's unenforceable. Because with this whole right-of-way issue, it does affect, I counted today, I sat at my desk and I took all the tax maps and I counted 49 parcels that this code section affects. And again, we go back to people want to go back to the comprehensive plan. Well, the comprehensive plan, we want the residential development near the villages, not on the ag and conservation properties. So as far as there's one road in this county that has a 50-foot right-of-way, and that is Chester Gap Road, the main road. Most of your secondary roads, of course, according to the Boarddocs Act, have a 30-foot wide right-of-way. Many of your other roads is a variable right-of-way. There's hardly ever any road is exactly a 50-foot right-of-way. Even your main roads, they're all variable right-of-ways. And just because it's a right-of-way width does not mean that that road has been established by any sort of standards with, road design, anything. That just says that your right-of-way is this amount of feet and that's it. No road standard was addressed in it. So that's all I have for now.
Speaking to the applicant and the zoning administrator, are you finished? Do you have anything else you would like to add?
I don't know how much time I used up.
A fair amount.
How much? 10 minutes. I used up 10 minutes, so we'd ask for the 20 in rebuttal.
So the record is complete. You don't have anything more to add.
November line decision of the zoning administrator. That would be our complete record.
Okay, okay.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mike Brown on behalf of Mr. Taylor. I won't make a lengthy presentation at this time. What we'd ask is that under your rules of procedure, 7-4 D2, we'd like to simply make a rebuttal statement at the conclusion of the public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. I would. Can you wait till after the public hearing? If you like. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing. I'd like you to state your name and your address, if you would, please. Fran Krebser.
Fran Krebser, Wakefield District. I believe that everyone here will agree that no matter where you go in this county, at this point in time, we have relatively preserved rural setting in a region that is increasingly affected by development. The forest and agricultural vistas of Rappahannock provide an irreplaceable quality of life value for county residents and visitors alike. Our 2020 comp plan states that because of these attributes, as well as our location to the national park, we are designated as a scenic county. And all goals, principles, and policies will reflect and evolve from this fundamental recognition. What we have out here, no amount of money can buy in Northern Virginia. Once built or concreted over, it's gone forever and well worth protecting now. Our county leaders, Board of Supervisors, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, all have a responsibility in governing to look out for the best interests of the citizen population as a whole, as well as those who visit our beloved county. This zoning issue in Sperryville needs immediate attention because a decision made tonight will affect the safety and scenic beauty of that village and zoning within the entire county. Woodward Road is a picturesque secondary road, and there is important value in protecting against subdivisions popping up along secondary roads, diminishing the rural and natural feel of our county. Woodward is far too narrow coming into Sperryville to warrant ingress and egress of multiple construction vehicles or increased traffic from a subdivision of 5 to 7 homes. I drove that road on Sunday to familiarize myself with what the residents and businesses will be up against and saw several adults, some with children, walking in the middle of the road. I like that. I'm very concerned if this development decision is not reversed, it will only encourage rezonings of agricultural and conservation zone properties. This is our only line of defense against subdividing along small secondary roads. Over the years, there have been many groups of concerned citizens who have devoted their time, talents, and money serving on community boards such as RLEP, RCCA, and the Krebser Fund to ensure that the goals listed in the comprehensive plan be followed, some of which are preserve the overall viewshed in the county in its unspoiled natural setting, which gives it special character and identity. Preserve and protect the mountains and scenic ridgetops with special concern for crests and ridges. Preserve and protect ground and surface waters. Preserve and enhance rural agriculture and open spaces. Preserve air quality and limit noise and light pollution. We need to adhere to these goals and the plan. I respectfully request that you please reverse the zoning administrator's decision to allow the overturning of this zoning ordinance. Thank you very much.
My name is Karen Hunt. I'm in Jackson District on Viewtown Road. And per prior discussion with Sharon Pierce, there are two individuals who could not be here tonight, submitted written testimony, but it was too late to get into the record, and so I'm going to read their comments after I read my statement. So the Board of Zoning Appeals is in receipt of my letter. I just want to reiterate a few points here. I want to be clear, this is not a NIMBY issue. This is an issue that affects the future of the entire county and our ability to protect our rural agricultural way of life, our ability to protect our scenic landscapes, our ability to protect our small rural secondary roads from small lot development. This is about our county maintaining, implementing, and enforcing our strong protective ordinances that govern the nature, the type, the degree, and the location of subdivision development allowed on small rural secondary roads, roads not capable of handling increased traffic and safety considerations that small lot development would create. This is about our county maintaining and enforcing strong ordinances that support our comprehensive plan. It is about our declared intent that we are a scenic county. That is stated in our comp plan. All goals, principles, and policies will reflect and evolve from this fundamental recognition. First and foremost, the right-of-way ordinance provisions in question were legislatively enacted. They have stood in good stead and protected Rappahannock County for nearly 34 years. Second, a zoning administrator is charged with interpreting and administering the zoning ordinance. It should not be within the zoning administrator's authority to declare any part of our county ordinance invalid, nor is it within her purview to refuse to enforce an ordinance. The zoning administrator also made a number of incorrect assertions in the letter of determination. I will not address these except to say that the issue memorandum that was submitted to you lays it out succinctly. Third, and context is important here, consider we are here today through a series of events initiated to subdivide a property in such a way as to circumvent the specific right-of-way provisions in our ordinance. The whole series of events that have led us to this point is disturbing and relevant here, and I won't elaborate further than that. However,
Excuse me, you have 30 seconds of your time left.
of 5 minutes,
Oh, sorry, no, you're right. No,
Thank you.
I got it.
however, this is not about one specific development. This is about precedent. The ordinance provisions at the heart of this matter were enacted nearly 34 years ago to protect us, and we should be defending them, not attempting to invalidate them. I will add that there is a misperception that a particular zoning on a parcel guarantees development at a maximum potential. It does not. By right does not infer that other relevant considerations are to be disregarded and that other ordinance conditions and provisions do not govern. There is an assertion by some that their property rights are being taken by compliance with ordinances. As I stated in my letter, I would argue the reverse applies. My property rights and those of others are negatively impacted when strong protective ordinances that we trust and rely on to protect our safety and our quality of life from ill-fitting, improper development are administratively undermined. I urge the BZA to find the zoning administrator overstepped her authority in her letter of determination and also erred in other findings as well. Thank you. Per discussion with the chair, this is a letter from Tom and Donna McCon in Amosville, Virginia. Dear Board of Zoning Appeal members, we are writing regarding the appeal of the zoning administrator's letter of determination. We have lived in Rappahannock County for 35 years. We feel strongly that it is important to keep our zoning ordinance strong. It is why we live here. It is our understanding that the 50-foot right-of-way provision in both the subdivision ordinance and the overall zoning ordinance has been enforced for more than 30 years. During that time, the right-of-way ordinances have been reasonably interpreted and have protected our scenic landscapes and small rural secondary roads from small lot developments. Many of our roads are narrow, winding, with limited lines of sight. Why is our current county staff proposing to undermine the right-of-way provision that is such a key part of our protective zoning ordinance? Protecting safety and quality of life are some of the most important jobs our elected leaders and certainly our paid staff are supposed to be accomplishing. Why isn't our county staff trying to find ways to defend our ordinances instead of trying to undermine them? Did the zoning administrator even have the authority to make such a determination? Why is something this important to the future of the county able to be done without public notice or input? Isn't it required that a revision of an existing zoning ordinance be approved by the Board of Supervisors? This is a separate. This is a separate.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Not sure where we left off. So, did the zoning administrator even have the authority to make such a determination? Why is something this important to the future of the county able to be done without public notice or input? Isn't it required that a revision of an existing zoning ordinance be approved by the Board of Supervisors and that the public elects to represent them? We are very concerned that the zoning administrator's interpretation, if not overturned, will make us a target for developers. That is not what we want or need here. We need to be protecting what we have. Development of our county isn't a given. We have protected this county with our strong ordinances, and we need to continue to do so. We urge you to overturn the zoning administrator's letter of determination, as she did not have the authority to rule a valuable part of our ordinance invalid. This is Tom and Donna McCon. The last letter from another property owner is Joyce Harmon in Wakefield District, and she is in Flint Hill. Dear members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, I am writing in reference to the Haynes appeal of the County Administrator's letter of determination. The specific sections of the county zoning ordinance in question were enacted in March of 1990 and have not been changed since then because they worked with the vision for the county and the comprehensive plan. I am writing this letter as I am ill and cannot attend the meeting tonight. I feel very strongly that this issue needs to be addressed by the full BZA board after Chris Parrish is instated next month. It is too important an issue to be addressed by an incomplete board. Parts of Woodward Road are barely 16 feet wide, and there is little to no shoulder on the road at the narrow parts. Other roads in the county have similar issues. The locals deal with it by making way for each other. When you add a development along a road like this, you not only do you have several to many years of construction workers, big trucks, and people who don't care about anything but getting to their job site, but you will have long-term increases in road traffic. Many Airbnbs have been refused because the roads were not appropriate to handle the increase in traffic. Why is nothing compared to what compared to what a development would do? Why the difference? This whole process appears to be trying to circumvent the ordinances that are in place. This property has road frontage on Route 211, which would be a perfectly useful place to bring a road into the development and likely would not encounter nearly as much objection. The issue is the current access road, Woodward Road, being insufficient. The other very important issue is the action of the zoning administrator. How can a zoning administrator overturn an ordinance enacted by the Board of Supervisors? And it was admitted that it was done in error. I respectfully ask the BZA to consider tabling this until the full board is instated. Thank you for your consideration, Joyce Harmon.
So my name is Mark Constantine, 70 Thornton Gap, Church Road, Sperryville. I want to start by saying nothing, as others have said, is personal about the particular requests that people are making and the right to use their property as they want. My main message is precedence, precedent, precedent. Okay, if you make this change, then you are fundamentally altering the ability of the requirements associated with future development. So, as other speakers have said, our gig here is that we want to preserve Rappahannock County in the way it is. Okay, it doesn't mean that somebody can't subdivide their property once with a family member. If frankly, I mean, personally, honestly, 40 feet, 50 feet, I don't know, okay? But the point is that if you allow this to happen, you open a Pandora's box. And so that is, so to me, the issue is you need to look at this in a comprehensive way, not in an isolated way. You've got to look at this as, if we're going to allow people to subdivide their property, how much, where, under what conditions, that kind of thing. You cannot do this in an isolated way because otherwise you are opening, as I said before, Pandora's box. The other point I would make, and I'll stop, is I read the documentation from the county on this, and the use of the word absurd was, suffice it to say, overused. Let me read you the Webster's definition of absurd. Ridiculously unreasonable, unsound, or incongruous, having no rational or orderly relationship to human life. I'm sorry, but pick your words more carefully. Thank you.
Excuse me. I'm Michelle Galler. I live in Washington, Virginia. The zoning administrator recently decided that a Rappahannock County ordinance requiring a 50-foot right-of-way from a new subdivision to a primary road is not enforceable. Michelle Summers' decision not to enforce the 50-foot right-of-way provision exceeded her authority. Only the courts can invalidate an ordinance. Furthermore, this process proceeded very quietly and under the radar. No such significant action should be taken without public hearing, understanding, and input. Greater pressure from developers on our county is likely due to increased internet and cell phone accessibility, along with institutionalized work-from-home policies. Yes, certain change needs to be accommodated, but the citizens should have a loud voice in those changes. Look at what happened in neighboring Loudoun County, where invalidated zoning restrictions emboldened developers and brought a host of problems, including water quantity and quality issues. Loudoun County struggled to keep up with its growth, expanding infrastructure and services for new residents, and this expansion led to an increase in county costs, growing debt burden, and higher tax rates as it became our nation's, quote, fastest growing county, unquote. Private property rights advocates opposed growth management measures, suggesting that zoning and growth control constituted an infringement of their rights. Some rural landowners also opposed new measures, wanting to retain the freedom to sell their land for profit. In the case of Loudoun County, residents began too late to speak out against the negative effects of growth, increases in traffic congestion, the destruction of scenic areas, and the disappearance of green space. I moved from Loudoun County because uncontrolled development destroyed the essence of what made the county a special place to live. The people who live in Rappahannock County seem to be more committed to upholding the pristine rural character of our county. However, as in what happened in Loudoun County, there are voices demanding that we loosen zoning and relax tourist home restrictions, amongst other changes. Those changes in Loudoun were slow and insidious until development became rampant and unstoppable. Developers enriched themselves to the detriment of existing residents' quality of life. Whatever has been said about one citizen's right to further subdivide land to save a, quote, nest egg, unquote, it is those who live here who will suffer the consequences of relaxed zoning. The people of this county must understand what hangs in the balance. It is paramount to keep zoning strong, and citizens must hold the Board of Supervisors accountable for protecting our enduring commitment to being a scenic county with a rural way of life.
Good evening. I'm Dan Lanigan from Hampton District, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of myself and my wife, Catherine Goldfarb, regarding the appeal of Miss Sally Haynes. I'm not a lawyer, but from what I've seen, I believe the zoning administrator has no authority to declare the zoning ordinance invalid or unenforceable. That's the ordinance that requires the right-of-way width of certain roads for land parcels being subdivided to be certain minimum widths. In particular, this decision to allow the Mount Airy subdivision to connect with Woodward Road rather than Route 211 is wrong. We know Woodward Road. When our home was being built 10 years ago in 2014, we lived on Main Street in Sperryville. We were a stone's throw from the intersection of Main Street and Woodward Road. We used to go for walks on Woodward Road, sometimes all the way down to where it ends at the other end at Ashby Road. It's beautiful, it's narrow, it's winding. It needs to be protected. Allowing this subdivision to dump cars onto Woodward Road is wrong. Invalidating the county ordinance, which has been in effect for more than 30 years, is wrong. She did not have authority to do that. This protects the rural character of our county from subdivisions popping up along the many, many narrow secondary rural roads in our county. That's why we're asking you tonight to uphold the appeal of Ms. Sally Haynes. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Lee, and I live at 597 Woodward Road in Sperryville, Virginia, which is on a mountain. And when I first heard that this sort of thing was going to stretch out towards my house, I went, where? The mountain goes up like this. There's no place to build up there. Well, they're talking about magic. There's no building place there. What? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Building in a place that's not buildable. Look at there may be a few small areas on Woodward Road. If you go high enough up the mountain and you find a place that's level, you might be able to build up there. But why are we talking about people jamming in? This is all what we talked about 30 years ago when I moved here. It was all, shut the door, we're all gonna move, everything's gonna be crazy. Well, it is crazy. But we have to learn to live in our community. We have to learn to grow with the people that come to us because they love us, they want to be with us, right? So if we engage, I'm sorry, I'm shaking. If we engage with that kind of love and generosity and caring about the land and the kind of materials people build with, instead of worrying about how much space we're going to have, we can do this. We can do it together.
My name is Patty McGill Peterson. I reside in the Piedmont District. I think many of us came here tonight to basically reaffirm the process that undergirds land use policy. The BOS legislates, the BZA interprets, the zoning administrator enforces. And yet, we're told that the ordinance is unenforceable. And that really put a glitch in what I was going to say tonight, because I have to now say, in having come out here and looked at the ordinance before I bought property, that if we have allowed something to stand for 30 plus years that is unenforceable, My confidence in the zoning laws protecting property rights has absolutely gone rock bottom. We've talked about property rights, and I don't want to repeat what everybody has said, but there are multiple property rights involved here. Not just the applicant, but also the appellant. When you deal with any issue like this, you're dealing with multiple property rights. And now we are being told that we may have no rights if this is unenforceable. And so that has to be examined very, very closely, I think. But clearly, doing this in a preemptory way is not acceptable. And so I think that is a central issue. I think also we have ancillary issues that are extremely important. Beyond multiple property rights is the process that has gone on to get us here. It is my understanding that while some had access to that discussion, the appellant did not. And the appellant had to work very hard to get information. This should not be the case. All parties, all those who think they have property rights should have equal access to the process and to information. The other thing that I have trouble with is the public discussion in which the applicant is called, or the appellant is called a NIMBY. Not in my backyard. Well, the fact is, in the western part of this county, our backyard happens to be the rolling hills that take us to the Shenandoah National Park, which is one of our great national and natural assets that drives our economy for small businesses, that brings people here, and they come here because we are different. It's what Phil Irwin used to say, we are uniquely different. And it actually is the golden goose, our difference. And so protecting that is extremely important. The last thing I would note is I reread, when I come to meetings like this, I reread our comprehensive plan. And there is a supporting reference there to a survey done in 2015 in which residents randomly were asked a variety of questions. And the one that really caught my attention was a question that asked, what should never change in Rappahannock County? The responses generally reference two things. One, the natural beauty and the rural character of our county. The second was zoning restrictions that were highly enforceable. So the comments you've heard tonight have said that things haven't changed much since 2015 on that score. Thank you very much.
Rick Kohler, Jackson District. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of the Rappahannock League for Environmental Protection, RLEP, as its president. As the last speaker brought up Phil Irwin, I thought it was my turn to speak. The RLEP was created in 1970 and spurred the county to develop its first comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. The decision tonight affects zoning throughout the county. RLEP retained legal counsel in order to fully understand and clearly articulate a position for this hearing with a 7-page brief delivered to the BZA yesterday. To be clear, this appeal is not about Mount Airy's rights or Mrs. Haynes's or widths of right-of-ways or whether the zoning ordinance is right or wrong. It is easy to become mired in the forest of these arguments and forget the single true point of the formal appeal before you tonight. It is about a zoning administrator finding that is void ab initio and yet affects the entire county. 1, Virginia Code permits local governing bodies to delegate to the zoning administrator the necessary authority on behalf of the governing body to administer and enforce the zoning and subdivision ordinances. 2, binding Virginia Supreme Court precedent holds that neither the zoning administrator nor the Board of Zoning Appeals has the authority to determine the validity of a zoning ordinance. While zoning administrators and BZAs must interpret zoning ordinances to execute their responsibilities, that obligation does not give rise to a power for either to declare these ordinances invalid, or does not give rise to a power to declare these ordinances invalid. This is reserved for the Board of Supervisors through public hearings and proper zoning changes as are currently being considered with the Berkeley Group. 3, the Supreme Court of Virginia held zoning administrators have no authority to waive zoning requirements unless explicitly granted such authority. Neither the zoning nor subdivision ordinance contains explicit authorization for the zoning administrator to waive requirements. 4, the zoning administrator goes well beyond the bounds of interpreting the right-of-way provisions to reach a legal conclusion on their validity, concluding they are both void and unenforceable. This authority is not given to either the zoning administrator or the BZA, and any such determination is a legal nullity or void ab initio, which is void at initiation. 5, even if the BZA could reach to the question of the validity of the right-of-way provisions, it must uphold them. All exercises of legislative power, including zoning power, are presumed valid and reasonable. 6, in the end, the zoning administrator made a judgment without factually showing the current right-of-way provision fails to advance legitimate zoning values. These include preservation of rural landscape, prevention of traffic congestion, and protection of life from development on long and winding roads. This approach contradicts a century of case law on the review of legislative actions. Every link in the chain of reasoning contradicts long-established legal norms governing not only the role of zoning administrators, but also review of legislative action. The board must reject it. Having rejected the zoning administrator's approach, the outcome of this appeal and the judgment on the proposed subdivision is clear. The appeal should be granted. The zoning administrator's determination that the right-of-way provisions are void and unenforceable should be recognized as itself void, and the proposed subdivision must be held to the plain terms of the zoning and subdivision ordinances. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Monica Worth. I'm in the Piedmont District, and I live at 473 Woodward Road at the intersection of Woodward and Ashby. I believe the determination should be overturned because a zoning administrator is precluded by law from invalidating the ordinance, and that is the effect of the decision of September 9th. The case law and existing legislative rules and precedents offer many, many opportunities to protect, defend, and preserve the ordinance, which clearly carries out the will of the people of Rappahannock County to do just that, to preserve and protect our scenic county and rural way of life, as well as the economic engine of the county that depends upon it. Thank you.
Tommy Atkins, property owned at 1001 Woodward Road. I've owned my property there since 1972. In fact, I was born in the house in front of my property in 1946. So you can say I have a little bit of history with Woodward Road. Okay. One, I've heard some statements made here tonight that's incorrect. One, Route 600 Woodward Road is not the lead road to the Shenandoah National Park, by no means. Mr. Taylor's property cannot be seen from Route 211. Route 211 is the main gateway to the Shenandoah National Park, and we have more eyesores on Route 211, and I won't go into naming some of them, but you know where some of them are at. So, with that, but then also, we heard about Loudoun County. Do you know that Loudoun County has more gravel roads than any county in the state? It's a fact. Okay, now, they say, I've heard or read in the papers that Woodward Road is a one-lane gravel road. Not true. It is not. It's a 30-foot prescriptive right-of-way. There have some asphalt on it, and then it's been come over top with surface treatment, which is tar and gravel, and that's been done twice. That is not considered to be a gravel road. Now we hear people talk about unsafe on Woodward Road. People are not supposed to be walking in the middle of any road to start with. All right, now let's talk again about the safety on Woodward Road. Yes, at Main Street, you have a site problem. You have a 200-year-old sycamore tree that is rotten. The limbs are falling out of it onto the road and onto people's houses and could fall on people's head. Nothing's being done about that. You not hear any of these people back here that's supporting Sally Haynes bring up anything about improving safety. In fact, every house on Woodward Road from Main Street has done something to cause an unsafe act. I'll start right at the beginning of Main Street. It's not but 6 houses from Main Street up to Sally Haynes' house. There's only 6, so it's not a lot of houses. All right, the first house on the right as you come off of Main Street, the gentleman has a big RV parking in it, takes up maybe 3/4 of his driveway. Then he has 2 SUVs pulled up behind it. So what does he have to do? He has to back out into the road. Is that a safe act? Is that the road's fault? Now, let's come on up. Mr. Ross's property is okay. The house on his left of Mr. Ross has a private fence, a privacy fence, and a fruit tree that grows over into the middle of Woodward Road. And that is causing a sight distance problem at Hopewell Lane. So is that the road's problem? Don't think so. All right, then you come on up to my property. My property is my house is over 200 foot off of Woodward Road. I have dedicated 25 foot of right-of-way on my side. So there can be improvements made on Woodward Road. But no, nobody's pushing for that. Even the Board of Supervisors are apparently not pushing for that. It's not at the top of their priority. So then now let's come on up to Sally Haynes' house. All right, I think she bought her house in around 2015. Okay, but first off, before we go much further on that, what if back in 2015 when she bought her house, if Tom Taylor or Tommy Atkins had spoke up and said, no, I'm not going to allow you coming in to viewing mine, either one of us could have ran the price up on it. We could have bought that property. So it wasn't a question. So how would...
You have 30 seconds.
30
minutes.
Oh, okay, all right then, very quickly. This is not a precedent setting that Ms. Summers has done here in it. You have before you copies of T&M Properties at 1001 Woodward Road has an approved subdivision, and it was signed off on by the zoning administrator, John McCarthy, the Planning Commission. Gary Settle was the chairman of the Planning Commission, and it was a different board of supervisors. So this, and there are other subdivisions in this county on secondary road. So this is not anything present. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? You coming up? Okay.
Yes, I'm Carolyn Butler. I live on Hopewell, one house off of Woodward Road. Now, I don't want to bore you with what I have to say, but I have to say it. Tommy and I are descended from the man that built that road. That was James Woodard in the early 1800s when he built his mill. He needed to get to the village without going across the river. So that's why the road is there. So we have enjoyed that view for 9 generations, and it is going to be there. Those beautiful mountains are going to be there when we die. So we don't want to destroy Sperryville. We want to improve Sperryville, because when we grew up here, we had 300 residents in the village, and it was a very viable place. We have 3 general merchandise stores. At one time, we had a drugstore. We had a coffee shop. We have more than we do now. But the problem is that many of the houses have been taken and turned into small businesses. So that's one reason there are not many people living here. I know in my grandparents' house, there were 12 people living there. They had 3 bedrooms, so I don't know how they did it. But people required smaller spaces then. So I think it's very important to build some new houses to replace those ones that have been taken away. To keep the village from becoming like Washington, which is a dead place. My grandmother lived there. It was a wonderful place. It's nothing now but a business with very few people living there. So I don't want Sperryville to become that way. Neither do I want sidewalks and roundabouts. That will run the village. We are a village, and not one person has a right to control what we do there. It's not incorporated. So I think all of this has been blown out of proportion. Tom, 25 years ago, his land was zoned RR5. That means residential 5 acres. He could put 7 houses there, but he is saying he wants to do 2. So 2 new houses were built on on Hopewell in the last 6 years. One of them was mine. There was nothing to go through like this. It's not going to change. It's going to improve. So I stick with Michelle. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bob Trafton. I live on Woodward Road with my wife, Piedmont District. I just want to say I support many of the conversations and discussions that have been brought up today. We're very cognizant, and we want to say that we want strong zoning. We want to maintain the zoning that we currently have, and in many cases, build upon it and strengthen it. We do live on Woodward Road, and increases in traffic, increases in safety are very important to us. It would affect us deeply, and we do walk on Woodward Road. And any additional access to Woodward Road, whether it be additional lots that are created as a result of subdivisions, would result in additional traffic, and we're very concerned about that. This also has the impact of, has the ability to impact additional properties throughout the county. By changing this one discussion of the right-of-way width, it has the ability to unlock many other properties across the county through rezoning for redevelopment. we don't want to take away property rights that people already exist, that are already in existence, such as Mr. Taylor's with his 5-acre lots. We're not anti-development. We just want the development and the subdivisions to occur within the current approved rules of the county. One other item I want to bring up is subdivisions of land, and this is for the audience and supervisors in the room. It should be a public and transparent process. It should be notified and noticed in the papers, similar to land transfers and permits. At the moment, it's not. There's no way to know what property is subdivided. And in Ms. Haynes' case, it was a very challenging process for her to even get to the bottom of what happened on this particular parcel. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dee Wines, Piedmont District. I'd like to start by saying, in recent hearings and public comments, the county zoning administrator has been portrayed as having done something shady or working under cover of darkness to enact this change. I think it's important to note that the zoning administrator followed adopted procedures in response to a request for a letter of determination. This decision was not made in a vacuum. Relevant Virginia law was referenced to bolster the decision. Additionally, there is virtually no area within the county that meets the criteria of these two zoning sections. I also doubt that this determination was made without consultation with the county attorney, the county administrator, or without the knowledge of the Board of Supervisors. The language proposed by the zoning administrator will remain in place until such time that the Board of Supervisors would take action to draft and pass permanent replacement language in a zoning ordinance. Second, there's been a lot of sky is falling alarmist comments about what happens if these sections are rescinded and replaced. People seem to believe that these zoning sections, if they are eliminated, that somehow the county would be suddenly overrun by mass housing developments. This alarmist rhetoric, which plays into people's fears, is simply false. The fact is that any subdivision over 3 lots requires a very thorough, multi-phase, multi-departmental review and approval process that will require at least 2 public hearings. I've heard people speak against the ordinance change, and one common complaint is that Woodward Road cannot handle the increased traffic, that the road is too narrow, that it is too windy. It's always a comment about the state or condition of the road, with no comment about the right-of-way itself, which is the subject of this hearing. Why is that? I would be willing to bet that the majority of the people in the room have no idea what the right-of-way is on the road they live. I know what the right-of-way is on my road, and I also know that there are at least 3 different right-of-way widths along it. So ultimately, the right-of-way is not the issue, but rather the state and condition of the road in question. The language used in the zoning administrator in the proposed changes to the ordinance directly addresses road standards required for subdividing. I believe that these zoning sections have restricted and denied property owners' rights, certain rights, for more than 30 years. These code sections have nullified entire sections of the zoning ordinance. This Woodward Road property is zoned RR5. It lies within the village of Sperryville. I appreciate that the appellant may be upset at the prospect of new homes being built near the property, but the fact remains that the zoning maps, when adopted, anticipated and intended that this property would one day become single-family residential lots. I do not believe that property owner rights should be denied their rights to their property because some people in the county are either resistant to change or don't want anything to change. And lastly, I've noticed in public hearings there is a common refrain from the Board of Supervisors. Comments offered in response to applicants, and that is, we need affordable housing. We need housing for teachers and housing for workers. My question is, from where will that housing come? It will have to come from the subdivision of property such as the one on Woodward Road. If you want to provide more housing, you must provide a path to make that possible. Removing these 30-year-old code sections will be a step in that direction. I encourage you to accept the language changes offered by the zoning administrator, to leave it to the Board of Supervisors to adopt new language for the subdivisions that meet the needs of the community, and to follow the zoning ordinance and allow the zoning ordinance to function and operate as it was intended. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Barbara Adolphi. Can you hear me? Okay. I just want to say that when all of this came out about what happened recently in terms of rezoning, I was really hurt by that because last year, 1,400 or 400, I can't remember how many people signed petitions against this piece of property being rezoned. And I feel badly that within the community there's a sense of sneaking around. And that might not sound, I don't mean to be overly critical, but I don't like to be sneaked around. The other thing is one of the things that comes out of the ashes of all this discussion is something that Steph Ritter, our 5 of our 50 nominee this year, said something at a meeting last week or 2 weeks ago that I've been thinking about. She said, why don't we get a committee of people together to go look at which properties meet the requirements so that we can build a community there? And I thought to myself, oh my God, what a good idea. We just find what landowners would agree to have a subdivision and it would be on the roads that can access safely. I think Mr. Taylor, if I understand it correctly, can access his subdivision if he comes through the 211 bridge over the river. So I think the honesty of people with each other and are telling their feelings and thoughts tonight, I appreciate that. I've listened very carefully. But I think we need to find out how we can build a few bridges and to find ways to, we need kids in our schools. I support getting subdivisions made, but not where it's not safe. I would not want to see my child in a bus going down that road that goes down to Estes Mill. That is a terrible turn. I was always afraid when I drove on it, much less when I walked on it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? You want to?
Hello, my name is Rick Lassard. I'm an architect. My wife and I have property in Piedmont District at 59 Kilby Farm. We also own a piece of property on Woodard Road, right behind Ray Jackson, which is the last house on the top of the hill, access off of Woodard across Mr. Jackson's property. I have, over the years, we subdivided our property on Kilby Farm years ago. And the 30-foot easement that we have on our property has protected us in terms of having overdevelopment, which we didn't want. And at one point, our neighbor came to me and says, will you give me or sell me a 50-foot right-of-way? And I said, no, because that's not what was our intention on the property. The same thing is the intention on Woodard Road. It's a 30-foot right-of-way for a reason. And I think VDOT put it there. The county didn't put it there. I don't think it had any right one way or another at the time. Now, people talk about, maybe it's unenforceable or blah, blah, blah. If you have a 30-foot right-of-way, that's the reason why that road is so narrow. If I had a 50-foot right-of-way, the road would be probably wider. So I would like you to look at this in toto, because I believe, talk about, is it 49 lots that this may affect, or 60 lots that it might affect? We're talking another 100 to 150 houses, because let's assume that we could have a house on the existing lot to begin with. So if you double or you have two more lots on a piece of property, that's a lot more than I think you're really anticipating. By upholding this decision, we could be open a floodgate. I think it should be thought about and actually looked at by the Board of Supervisors, which would have a larger public hearing, I would imagine. And in my 40 years of being before boards as an architect, we're very fortunate in Rappahannock County because most of the time I don't get out of the meeting until 12 o'clock. So hopefully we'll be out of here soon.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone? No, please. Is that anybody else would like to speak? Okay.
My name is John Capioli.
I don't necessarily agree with Michelle Summers all the time. We're in court right now. We were at the state Supreme Court last week on opposite ends of an issue with zoning. But in this one, I have to support her. I just heard an architect, and I hate architects. I've been building houses for 30 years. They draw a line, and then I have to make it work. I'm building a road right now for the Little Washington Winery that is mandated by the county to be able to be passed by 2 vehicles. It's on a 30-foot right-of-way. The road itself is 18 feet wide that I'm creating from a 9-foot road. I've got drainage in it. We've gone through engineering. We've gone through VDOT with everybody else. So when I hear people say you got to have 50 feet, that's crazy. You don't need 50 feet. I live on 211. I see traffic, and I deliver compost and other materials all through the county with dump trucks and things like that. I know what a narrow road is. Go down Bessie Bell Road. Go to the end of Bessie Bell Road with a truck and try to turn around. It's not going to happen. I have to back 2 miles down that road, get 2 people out in order to back out. But it's not going to change. Everybody's talking about the comprehensive plan. Well, the reality of it is the comprehensive plan is a mission statement. It has no value whatsoever at law. There's no penalties for it, for ignoring it or paying attention to it. There's no benefits to it. The property in here, they're all talking about, oh, it's going to go all over the county. No, it's not. It's only an issue in the RR5 zone, which is set through the comprehensive plan and the zoning to be around the villages. I live on an ag property, zone ag 1. My right-of-way is 50 feet because I'm on 211. That makes sense. 80% of this county is built, people are living on ag zoned. They will never be able to subdivide it into 5-acre lots or 2-acre lots. It's 25 acres per lot. Yes, you can get a family zone split. I own a property. My property is 18 acres. I bought the next door neighbor's property. That's 3.5 acres. Even if I combine them, I'm only allowed to have 1 house. So if I leave it alone, I get 2. But for this to become an issue that people think is going to spread through the county, and we're going to be Loudoun County. I sat in this room and listened to somebody complain about a solar farm. And the man with a straight face said, "It's going to steal my sunlight." See, and everybody laughed because it was just this ridiculous statement as this is going to run rampant through the county. We're going to protect all of the county if we don't stop this. Come on. Be realistic about this. I know each and every one of you that's up on the board here. You have been realistic most of the time. I won't go 99%. You did very well when you did the dog park, and you got slapped for it unfairly. It's probably going to get you again, but I think that you're brave enough. Do the right thing. Follow her. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to I'm Robin Day, Sperryville. We're not going to get into what road I'm on. Everyone seems to know Woodward Road. I think the issue, I mean, we can stand here and everyone could be for the doing away with the 50-foot right-of-way. The thing is, it's the rule. You got to follow the rules. You got to do the right thing. You know, she felt that it was unenforceable. I think it is enforceable. Who's right? Board of Supervisors or a court of law? This has nothing to do with Tommy Taylor. The ones that seem to be oppose it seem to be against those on Woodward Road. We don't. I encourage him to do with his property whatever the rules allow him to do. Follow them. And then the other 2 points I want to make is it doesn't matter whether my RV is in my driveway. I still have to back out. Okay? You know, You can't even turn a bicycle around in my driveway, so what the heck? So anyway, just follow the rules. That's all I'm encouraging you to do. That's it.
Okay, this is it. Anybody else? Is there anyone on Zoom? Can we do, oh, we got one.
Good evening. Mirka Taylor, Piedmont District. I just wanted to raise one point and ask a question. A lot of people made the slippery slope argument here today. I think that was addressed by someone else that who spoke before me. The one question I wanted to ask, or the point I would like to make is, I don't think we should have a regulatory regime that would prevent the development on Woodward Road, precisely because I believe that Woodward Road is the type of development that the county should want. I'm perfectly mindful of the need to be thoughtful about future planning, about thinking about the future and so on. But my question would be, if we don't allow a development on Woodward Road, which is in the village, in line with the comprehensive plan, it's within walking distance from everything that Sperryville has to offer, and it's a beautiful set of things. It's also in an area where there are already existing buildings, so it does not interfere with an area that's unspoiled or unbothered, if you will. So areas that we really do want to protect. My question to everyone here would be, if this is not the development that we want, what is a development that we want? What properties does it have that Woodward Road doesn't have? I would be genuinely interested in an answer. And it's possible that the answer is none, and that is something that how you feel. If that is the case, let's just say that openly, that we think that the county should be exclusive and restricted to those who have been lucky to have got theirs early enough. Thank you very much. Mirka Taylor.
Gary Sutton in Piedmont District. I'm just rising to support Sally Haynes's appeal. And it isn't particularly about Sally, it is about the precedent that is being set. There is a precedent. They may not come rain tomorrow, but this is chipping away at one of the things that have preserved and protected us for as long as we have. I think everybody in this room loves to drive up and down our rural roads. And if you actually allow people to start building houses on the roads, we're going to lose those scenic byways that we've already enjoyed. I just drove back from Culpeper, and it always shocks me when I drive back that you know when you hit Rappahannock County. When you know when you drive Thornton Gap Church Road, there's lots of people live on that road. It's the road I live on. But you don't see them because they're required to be off the road. So I would encourage you that we don't want to chip away at these ordinances. I would actually encourage the Board of Supervisors to strengthen that ordinance and make it a stronger one to help protect us, because we're going to get enormous pressures from developers. It's starting. And if we don't protect what we have, we're going to lose what we have. By the way, I actually, Mrs. Butler's come, I actually believe we do need more housing. But I think we need housing that is consistent with what we as the county and community have said in our ordinances. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak in the public hearing?
I'm John Jameson. I live on Annie's Lane, which is outside of Sperryville. And we've heard a lot of stuff here today about why we should and shouldn't approve or disapprove the development. But the bottom line is that the zoning administrator and the BZA is tasked with enforcing the zoning ordinances. And to develop a property, you don't have to comply with one part of the ordinance, you have to comply with all of them. And a road either has a 50-foot right-of-way or it does not. So the bottom line is that is the thing that we need to decide today. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to bring the letters that I've received and put them into the record. So, there you go. And at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I will give a chance for rebuttal. I'm sorry, what? The appellant. Okay. It looks like Mr. Goff is on his feet.
Go ahead, Kier. I appreciate that. Walk out when I start talking, okay. Yeah, one of the fundamental things I'd like the board to keep in mind is that, do you think that the original drafters of the district didn't know that Woodard Road was a tiny little road? Of course not. They knew that when they drafted it and with their little crayons a couple of decades ago made that RR5. So I don't buy the argument that they then came along in 1990, the same group of guys, and they then enacted a statute that was intended to eviscerate every single part of the rural zoning district. It is, I disagree respectfully with the gentleman who said it's not an absurd result. Of course it's absurd. If you can't develop your property in RR5 according to your by right use, you've got a conflict of laws. You got one law saying one thing, you got a by right use, 5 to 1 acres, depending on what you are, and then you got another statute that says you got to have a 50-foot right-of-way that doesn't exist nowhere, and that's not a private right-of-way. One gentleman said, "Oh, I put 30-foot right-of-way on my private property." Well, that's his business. What this is a public road right-of-way. In Virginia, in 1932, it's called the Byrd Act. Presumed 30-foot, okay? Nowhere in this county except for Chester Gap Road is there a 50-foot public right-of-way, okay? Now, so remember, we're talking about two diametrically opposed statutory provisions. The zoning administrator is the pointy end of the spear. She's got to enforce it. What's she supposed to enforce? Okay, Mr. Property Owner, I'm sorry, but all rural residential, all RR5, RR2, and village residential is no longer susceptible of subdivision. So it's not unreasonable for her to conclude, wait a minute, this thing actually requires me to enforce a property owner, an applicant, to be the blind man that can see, because there is no such animal on this plane, a 50-foot public right-of-way. Can't be done. Now, a lot of what I've heard from the audience is that they got a problem with the zoning maps. They don't want any development in the rural residential zones. Well, that horse is out of the barn. That's been done now for decades. So the only issue before this board was, is her action on this application right? I mean, it sounds to me, if the road is so bad, a lot of the folks are saying, shouldn't have any further development whatsoever. And I'll point out one more time to you folks that the agricultural parcel directly to the north of Mr. Taylor's parcel could be subdivided multiple times because the acreage is large, and those could be as small as 2-acre lots right on Woodard Road by right. Plus, remember, people own back up Woodard Road. That road goes up there a long way, and they can put houses up there too by right. So why is Mr. Taylor's application being singled out for different treatment? The zoning administrator had to make a decision. And remember, this isn't a nefarious process. This is an applicant-driven process. The only time she can act is when there's an application before her. That doesn't come before the Board of Supervisors for a public hearing. That comes before her office first. I also want to point out there's been some talk about this is going to spread throughout the county. The statute itself that we're dealing with on its face excludes agriculture and conservation. It only is going to do, because what's the other choice? And it's residential. So which one of these rules in the code is she supposed to enforce? The right of division as guaranteed to the property owners by virtue of the zoning districts, or this other, what I think has been aptly described as a somewhat obscure division. I'll also point out, someone said there hasn't been enforcement over the years. That's true. Mr. McCarthy, you can find this throughout the land records where there are not 50-foot wide public rights-of-way, especially in Amosville, that for parcels that were part of family subdivisions or other, they're little tracks that lead out to 211, little 10-foot, 9-foot tracks that lead out to 211. Yet they were approved by zoning administrators, specifically John, in 2001. And the land records were replete with this sort of thing. And the sky has not fallen, okay? So what happened in this particular case was that you had an application that was then, there was a lot of public interest in it. And that's why this argument was made using this particular code section. Otherwise, in the past, these family subdivisions and other subdivisions have simply ignored that provision. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Is Mr. Brown want to do a rebuttal?
Yes, ma'am, I'll defer to the appellant.
We'd like to be last, please.
Okay.
Let us know.
Mr. Brown?
I'm happy to go in whichever order. Again, Mike Brown on behalf of the original applicant, Mount Airy Field, and its principals, the Taylor family. Thank you for giving me a few minutes just to comment. We don't have a lengthy presentation for you, and there's a simple reason for that. And I'd like to encourage the board to consider the scope of what you're called upon to do tonight. And that is, your sole function is to determine whether the zoning administrator, whether her decision was legally correct. That's your only function here this evening. And bear in mind that the burden of convincing you that her decision was incorrect is not the zoning administrator's burden to defend herself, and it's not the county attorney's decision or a burden to convince you that she was right. Her decision before you this evening, by statute, under the Code of Virginia, is presumed to be correct. And it's the appellant, and only the appellant, that has the burden of proving to you that the zoning administrator's decision was legally wrong. Your function tonight is not to determine what are the appropriate uses of this property or other properties in the RR5 zoning district. It's not to determine whether it's in the public interest for the zoning administrator's decision to be upheld or overturned tonight. It's not to determine what you feel is the best result from a zoning standpoint. It's not to determine what should be the right zoning for the property or other properties in the RR5 zoning district. And it's not to determine whether the zoning administrator creates a public, whether her decision creates a public safety concern from the standpoint of vehicle usage of Woodward Road. None of those things are relevant to your determination tonight. The appellant and the public speakers urge you to consider all of those factors and others, and none of those are actually germane to what you have to decide tonight. The issue is, are you persuaded that her decision was legally incorrect? The Albemarle Land Use Handbook, which I know all of you all are familiar with, and it's a great tool. It's a tremendous amount of work went into it, and I'm sure that you all have reviewed sections of it yourselves. It talks about what the BZA should consider or not consider in making a determination about the correctness of the zoning administrator's decision. And what it highlights in a set-out box in that section of the handbook is that the BZA may not determine whether a proposed use is appropriate. It may not determine what is in the public interest. It may not amend or repeal the zoning regulation. It may not determine whether the zoning regulation is invalid. Those are the high points. But they go on to talk about whether intentional or not, some appellants or members of the public may raise irrelevant or immaterial issues and arguments. And I submit to you, intending no disrespect to the public speakers tonight, that most of what you heard is just that, irrelevant or immaterial. I respect everything that the public speakers brought up tonight, and there is an appropriate forum for that and for those concerns. Maybe I'll just skip to that. And it is the fact that we are currently in a major effort engaged on the part of our Planning Commission and our Board of Supervisors to review a top to bottom review of our zoning ordinance. And then after that, it'll lead to a review of our subdivision ordinance. It's the Board of Supervisors authority, and it's not within the scope of this board's authority to make zoning decisions about what is right or wrong from a zoning standpoint. Much of the comments you heard, I don't disagree with. I also appreciate Rappahannock County and what's been preserved here. But that's not the issue before you tonight. Ultimately, if the board, in its review of the zoning ordinance and later the subdivision ordinance, determines that it's appropriate for more densely zoned properties like R5, R2, village residential, to have a restriction about the type of public right-of-way, they can adopt that. And I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to be on their radar in light of the zoning administrator's determination that there is a conflict in the two code sections at issue and our overall zoning ordinance. I do want to also, just for a moment, address the memorandum that was filed in support of the appellant's appeal. And noting at the outset that that is really basically on its own admission has no more authority than just another one of the public comments tonight. The memorandum also largely strays into those same areas that I've already mentioned that are not relevant to your consideration. Things like whether the Rappahannock County Code, whether it creates a question, or whether the whether the Rappahannock County Code sections are consistent with the other provisions, other laws, whether they're local or state laws, or whether the decision is supported by the comprehensive plan and like considerations. And those, again, are simply not before you this evening. The memorandum also suggests, and at least one other speaker suggested, that the zoning administrator's determination was wrong and should be overturned because it exceeded the scope of her authority. And I do want to turn to that because I do think that that's a more valid complaint. The memorandum speaks in terms of the zoning administrator's decision as having waived requirements of the zoning ordinance. And I would urge you to go back and review Ms. Summers's letter. She didn't do that. Waiving in case law pertains to excusing specific applications from having to comply with certain ordinance requirements. There are a couple of cases that are cited in that memorandum that simply have no relevance to what's before you this evening. She didn't waive the requirements. I guess she could have issued a letter that could have attempted to do that, and that would have been subject to appeal as well. But instead, her letter clearly states that it's her determination that those sections can't be enforced because they conflict with the rest of the ordinance. The memorandum also, and the other speaker tonight suggested that Michelle's determination was incorrect because it attempts to void the statute. And the memorandum uses void and unenforceable a lot. But those two are not the same things. The voiding the statute or repealing it is a legislative act. I think we all understand that. But enforcement is a zoning administrator activity. And it's not just enforcement, it's interpretation and enforcement of the zoning ordinance. And that's exactly what Michelle was called upon to do when we made our application to her last fall, which was, in the exercise of her authority as zoning administrator, review those two code sections, review them in the context of the overall zoning ordinance, and then determine whether and to what extent they could be enforceable in the context of this specific subdivision application. The zoning determination letter hits on the theme several times of the improper condition the impossible condition, I think it even says at one point, that these two code sections place upon this property and other properties similarly zoned in the RR5, R2 district. An impossible condition for the applicant to be able to meet. And the reason I think that that's important, and I would urge the board to consider that as well, is that we do have a Virginia code section and case law, the town of Occoquan case, that is not directly on point in this case, but does talk about this concept of whether it is proper or whether a board can enact a zoning ordinance that creates by right uses, including residential by right uses, which is specifically at issue here. But at the same time can go over and require a special exception or special permit or impose other conditions on what would otherwise be a by right residential use. I urge you to consider that town of Occoquan case in the code section that says that's improper. A board can't do that. And that's part of what Ms. Summers was wrestling with when she was wrestling with this problem when we brought it to her attention in our application. And it's exactly this statute that the board enacted 30 plus years ago that does really do just that. It seeks to impose a special condition on a by right residential use, and it's only because this land, this ground, happens to be within an R5 zoning district and other land, exact same land, is not. It's in would be in the agricultural or conservation districts. And the county attorney has hit on that several times tonight, considering the exact same kind of land on the opposite side of the road is not subject to this special condition, and that's improper. And that's what the town of Occoquan case stands for as well. Ms. Summers' decision realizes that, and for that reason, she declines to enforce, again, in the exercise of her authority to determine enforcement, declines to enforce that condition. You know, we are all called upon at times in our professional lives or our personal lives to do the difficult thing. I submit to you that Ms. Summers could have done the easy thing when she got my letter and responded on November 9th. She could have said, oh, you know, that's in the ordinance. I'm not going to go there. It applies to your client. Sorry about your bad luck. You got 30 days to appeal. But she didn't do that. She did the difficult thing. And she wrestled with the zoning ordinance, and she wrestled with these conditions, and she made the determination that it was a problem and it couldn't be enforced. That was her determination. She didn't invalidate it. She didn't void it. Go back and look at the letter. She made the determination it couldn't be enforced. I submit to you as board members tonight, you are also perhaps being called upon to do the difficult thing. Probably the easier and popular decision, based upon a simple head count of public speakers tonight, would be for you to decide, yeah, her decision's wrong, we're going to overturn it. But I submit to you that you should consider and do the difficult thing and make the determination that the appellant hasn't met her burden of proving that this is a legally incorrect decision, and uphold Ms. Summers' determination. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. So there have been quite a number of statements made by counsel that really I'm not sure, I'm sure not intentionally, but I think are misleading and misstate the law. So I hope you will bear with me as I try to clarify some of those and make clear what the applicable law is, even though I'm not technically speaking as an attorney. Lay people can read the law too, and it's pretty obvious what it is in this case. So let me first address, if I may, the statement by Mr. Goff that we can't enforce this. He repeated it over and over. We can't enforce this. And Mr. Brown has also raised this, oh, this is not actually a decision that's invalidating this. We're just saying we can't enforce it. Well, please look at the last line of that decision, which says, therefore, you can go forward and subdivide. I will say it's not necessarily relevant to this per se, but Ms. Haynes, as an adjacent landowner, has no appeal rights in the subdivision process. This is her time to appeal this. This is the time for everybody in this county to appeal this, because what this does is it does say, I'm sorry, this ordinance is not enforceable, it's not valid, so you get to go forward and do it. You can call it an interpretation all day long, but it's an invalidation. And you can say she has a right to enforce an ordinance, which indeed she does have a right to enforce an ordinance. But if she comes up wrongfully in this case with an interpretation that, as she admits, is absurd, her job is to find an interpretation that's not absurd. Her job is to find an interpretation that makes sense, that implements the intent of the Board of Zoning, the Board of Supervisors when they created that. That does involve looking at the comprehensive plan. That does involve looking at the ordinance in its context. She could have interpreted it in a way that was a little bit more reasonable, but even choosing the absurd interpretation that she did, her job is to enforce it at that point. She has to enforce what the board passed. And if the landowner doesn't like her interpretation, she doesn't get to tell him, you don't have to do it. He has to appeal it to the next level, which is a court, because only a court can tell him he doesn't have to do it once the board has passed an ordinance through notice and comment as provided by the statute. That ordinance stands until a court overturns it. So I'm sorry, just because you style it as an interpretation doesn't mean it didn't invalidate that ordinance. For Ms. Haynes, as far as she's concerned, that ordinance is gone. He told her, the zoning administrator said, you can proceed to subdivision. That ordinance is gone. So to say it's not invalidated is disingenuous. There have been several factual misstatements. He says, he repeated, Mr. Goff, repeated several of the statements from the decision itself, which said it had the impact of nullifying the entire zoning maps, and anything in residential is precluded from subdivision, or it's impossible for any residential property to subdivide. But I was very grateful, therefore, to hear him and Ms. Summers then walk back that statement and state that approximately less than 50 parcels are actually affected by this. Having sat down for a couple of hours, it takes an hour or two to sit down and go through the zoning maps. It's certainly not all that difficult. I discovered that on most of these secondary roads throughout the county, by design, they are zoned agriculture and conservation because they recognize that that is the appropriate zoning. 25-acre parcels are appropriate for most of those roads. The parcels that are zoned residential, as anybody knows who knows much about our zoning maps, were circles drawn, as he said, in crayon around older pre-existing subdivisions primarily, little clusters of probably family subdivisions that pre-existed the zoning ordinance on the whole. They drew those lines around them, but they didn't want them to further subdivide into larger than 25-acre, or smaller than 25-acre parcels, because again, that is not appropriate on that road. Now let's also make clear that the ordinance doesn't say that you have to have a 50-foot right-of-way along the entire road. You have to have a 50-foot public right-of-way, it's true, from the parcel to be divided to a primary highway. That means if you're close to the primary highway, there may well be a 50-foot wide public right-of-way. Or if you have a large enough parcel, you could choose, we can't demand a proffer on it, of course, but you could choose to dedicate that if you wanted. Or, as Mr. Taylor has the option, you could access a primary highway if it's right there. We are glossing over that tonight, but Mr. Taylor does have the option of subdividing those lots fully and accessing onto 211. He chooses not to do that. He wants to take advantage instead of this very scenic, easy road to access on, but that puts a burden on everybody else on that road. And that's what that ordinance is about. So out of the hundreds of parcels in Rappahannock County, only 49 or a little bit around that are even potentially affected by this. When he says there's nothing to enforce, that's baffling to me. She can enforce what the ordinance requires, as I said, and that is her job. You can say, I'm sorry, you cannot subdivide into less than 25 acre lots unless you can obtain this necessary access. That is not some by right use. I love it when people throw that word around. There is no by right use to have your maximum potential density. If you look at the dictionary, it says maximum means the upper limit, the uppermost you can get. So when it says on that, what I was telling you, that 170-35, that use chart, it specifically says this is the maximum density. It may well be lowered by the location of the property, the characteristics of the property. If you have steep slopes, and in fact the Mount Airy parcel, Mr. Taylor's parcel, has steep slopes on it and some floodplain. That's why he can't get 7 lots from his 35 acres. He can only get 5 because of the reduction of that. And it's also unfortunately reduced because he doesn't want to access 211. So yes, that is not a by right gift when it says that your maximum density, the maximum amount you can get is 1 house per every 5 acres or 1 house per every 25 acres, whatever it may be. But that is the maximum you get, and it's clearly limited. So your by right is what you get after the limits apply. You do not have a right, a guarantee, an absolute guarantee to develop up to that maximum limit. Let's see if I can figure out what we else said. Mr. Goff said, it's the job of the zoning administrator to identify modifications or corrections which will allow approval of a plat. That is true, if it is legal to approve the plat. That's the whole problem here. They want to approve this plat with all their hearts, and they can't find a legal way to do it, so they said, well, I guess the law just must not apply. That's exactly what we're not allowed to do. I would also like to say, the claim that the lot across the road gets to develop into these little 2-acre lots and we don't get to develop into our 5-acre lots, again, just completely misconstrues and misunderstands the zoning ordinance. That section 170-35 identifies maximum density and minimum lot size. So for an agricultural property, you get 25-acre zoning, which means you get 1 house per every 25 acres. It also identifies a minimum lot size. So for that same density, you can take your 50-acre parcel, and one of those parcels can be 48 acres, and the other can be 2 acres. The obvious reason for that is if you have agricultural lands, they would like to maximize the amount of agricultural property you keep while minimizing the lot size for the house. For R5 property, you get 1 house for every 5 acres, but they insist in our zoning ordinance that the lots be no smaller than 5 acres. And that's what's said in 170-35. If the staff or others have a problem with 170-35, then I guess they better start raising questions about the zoning classification. But that acreage minimum acreage size is set for different reasons entirely. It doesn't change the density. It does not change the amount of traffic that's going to go on that little secondary road. You still, if you have a 25-acre parcel and you can have 48 acres and 2-acre parcels, you still only get 2 houses. You don't get a bunch more houses. You still only get 2 lots. So that's mixing apples and oranges. You still are only bringing 2 houses worth of traffic onto that road. So I guess, one other thing I'd like to say is this misconception that there are no roads in Rappahannock County that can possibly fit this. First of all, a lot of residential properties actually can access primary highways. Most of them can. So it's clearly not affecting those properties. But also, if you look in the comprehensive plan at least, it says that on page 49, it says that Route 647 Crest Hill Road in Flint Hill has between 30 and 50 feet in width. So at least in part, it's 50 feet in width. The same for Benvenue Road in Flint Hill, 20 to 50 feet in width. And in Amosville, Viewtown Road is 50 feet in width along its entire length. Now, it's true if you say, as a zoning administrator, her somewhat baffling interpretation that it had to be exactly 50 feet in width. If you interpreted this reasonably and said it has to be at least 50 feet in width, which is probably what it meant, since, for example, in the other provisions relating to roads internal to subdivisions, it requires that roads be at least 50 feet in width. And if you also interpreted it as most people assumed it would be interpreted, that you could access a primary highway, this actually restricts very few parcels. It just restricts a few parcels back on narrow, dangerous secondary roads, and I think that's exactly what the Board of Supervisors intended. So, in closing, I would say that, again, tonight, the question before the BZA is whether the decision of the zoning administrator is correct. Is it right or is it wrong? That is, in truth, all you must decide. Ms. Haynes has proved by more than a preponderance of the evidence that the November 9th decision is clearly wrong, that under the requirements of Virginia Code 15.2-23091, it is incorrect. Now let's make sure we understand what a preponderance of the evidence means. That means only that Ms. Haynes must demonstrate that it is more likely than not that the November 9th decision was incorrect, or that her arguments were more probable than those of the zoning administrator. Some people refer to this as a 51% rule. She has to, if the scale's like this, all she has to do is tip it, so it's just 51%. I don't think that there's any question that she has shown by a preponderance of the evidence. Since the Supreme Court says you can't invalidate a decision, Ms. Zoning Administrator, you can't refuse to enforce it, you can't waive its requirements, there is no question that this, whatever else, and Mr. Brown, I would agree with him on this, whatever else we may say about intent, interpretation, you maybe could modify the interpretations, but modify as you will, nothing can modify away the fact that she told Mr. Taylor that he can proceed without having to pay any attention to this ordinance. And therefore, Ms. Haynes and every other person on every secondary road in this county has just had their ordinance waived and no longer has the protection of it. So for that reason, I think that there is absolutely no question where you need to go tonight. I will say, apropos of that point, on a matter as complex as this, inevitably it raises other topics in people's minds, and people may ask questions generally like, well, maybe the ordinance should be written differently, or maybe the comprehensive plan should be written differently, or even questions like, I wonder if they handled this administratively as well as we'd liked. These may each be very legitimate, but you should not allow them to distract you from the issue before the BZA tonight. That issue is, again, was the November 9th decision right or was it wrong? Was it correct or incorrect? I will remind you, as I think you know, that at least 3 votes are required tonight to reverse the November 9th decision. Anything less than the necessary 3 votes, and this unlawful decision of a zoning administrator stands as a thing decided unless further appealed to court. We therefore strongly urge the BZA to fulfill your community obligation tonight and to vote to reverse the unlawful November 9th decision. Again, we deeply appreciate your attention tonight and over the past many weeks, as well as your deep service to the community. I know you're paid the big bucks, but volunteer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to have questions now from the board, and I actually have a couple of questions I'd like to ask Mike Brown. Mike, did you were you aware of these ordinances when you first made the email to Gary Curry? At the May 23rd email chain, were you aware of this ordinance?
You're talking about the ones that are at issue tonight.
Right.
Right. You'd have to show me the emails, but I do remember having
They're up on the.
Yeah, I do remember having an email exchange with Gary, and asked him about those. Yes, ma'am. And
did he tell you it couldn't be subdivided?
I don't remember exactly what his email said. Is that the one that came up in the context of the concern that an earlier subdivision plan had been approved incorrectly?
Right. There it goes. You
Yeah.
can take a look at it.
Right, so this is after this is after my client submitted his second plat, and it was rejected.
I'm not sure.
Right.
What I have is what you.
Right, so that's again, he had submitted a subdivision plat and had been rejected based upon those two code sections. That's the context of that exchange of emails.
Right.
And then and then later, I think it was September, then I wrote my letter, the
Right.
termination letter to Ms. Summers, asking her to make her determination regarding those code sections.
So the ordinance, in between May and September, did you talk to the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission about
ma'am.
this problematic ordinance?
No, not that I recall, no ma'am.
Okay. So the ordinance is still on the books, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to further that, or maybe this is for Mr. Curry, that in the same email chain, you have all things considered without a code amendment. We do not believe the parcel can be subdivided. There's no way to contest a general interpretation, whether it's made by me or the subdivision nation. If your client would like to challenge the perspective laid out here, a subdivision plat would need to be formally submitted with the appropriate fee. One of the things you're saying here is that, oh, here we go. Lastly, we discussed that the board might be willing to entertain the ordinance amendment, the amendment being an amendment to the right-of-way ordinance. Is that correct? No, I'm sorry. Let me read.
First, let me put the context, the email. The email was in response to Mr. Taylor showing me a proposed plat,
Right.
not a submitted plat. My response was, we can't approve this.
Right.
But anything I say in this email, A, I'm not the zoning administrator or subdivision agent, so it doesn't have the weight of the law. And B, it wouldn't have any force of law anyway, because you didn't submit an application. So if you want a formal determination, submit a plat. And that's what it says. And they did, eventually, and a request for a determination.
But at that time, it was your opinion that because of the 50-foot right-of-way, the subdivision could not be approved.
It was a generally held opinion before a lot of research went into the entirety of the subject over many months after being requested to make a determination.
Thank you.
Which resulted in a multi-page memo, which you have before you.
Yeah.
No? Any questions?
I'm good.
Okay. I bet Ron does.
Where to start? Going back to what Mr. Curry just said, can you explain if that was the determination in May, and according to the staff report, this decision was not strictly made by the zoning administrator? That she says in her background that it was developed between the county attorney, the zoning administrator, and the county administrator. And that generated the November 9th letter. How in that negotiation could you not take into consideration the answer that you had given him in May, saying that, you know, it wouldn't be legal?
All I will say is the determination speaks for itself. It was developed after a lot of research and consideration among three people.
Who wrote the letter of determination?
The letter speaks for itself. It's signed by Ms. Summers with input from Mr. Goff and myself, as it states.
Okay, there was also in Ms. Haynes' statements or whatever, she had concerned about the water situation in that area. That was a concern of hers. And in the staff report, or in the background on the staff report, it states that the zoning administrator contacted the local health department regarding the potential impact of the decision relative to the cited code section, and Miss Emily Borden responded via telephone that the decision wouldn't impact the adjacent property owners to the extent that would trigger the relevant well thresholds. The two codes that are referenced here have more to do with well drilling, and I believe what Ms. Haynes was referring to was the water table. In that area, as with any water table, you sink too many wells and suddenly everybody is affected by that. So, what was the person from the health department, and along that line, in the entire time that I've been on the VCA, all the information we have ever gotten from the health department is written. It becomes part of the record. Phone calls are phone calls. They don't lend themselves to being part of a record. And that's why 2 years down the road or whatever, Ms. Borden may not even be an employee of the state or whatever, and there would be no one to call on. There would be no record of this. So that determination via a phone call, to me, is irrelevant and not proper. And I'd also like to know, because this was the final part of it, or what is a relevant well threshold?
Are you suggesting that the grounds of appeal had something to do with the notice?
This is information that you put in the staff report for this appeal.
It's a requirement of notice. I don't believe there was anything in the grounds of appeal that had anything to do with notice.
I believe that, do I have to look for it here? Ms. Haynes she referenced the water situation on the property.
If there is something in the appeal that has to do with notice, then I suggest she should have provided some information to you.
She did.
To show you that the yield would be affected beyond that would be listed in that regulation, which I did not hear tonight.
Okay, let me go back to the Virginia Code 15.2-2286A requires notification of adjacent property owners of issued determinations if the decision or determination by the zoning administrator could impair the ability of an adjacent property owner to satisfy the minimum storage capacity and yield requirements for a residential drinking well pursuant to Virginia Code 32.1-176.4 or any regulation adopted thereunder. The water table, as it should be in any subdivision, particularly with multiple lots, be a factor in that process, because it can affect adjoining property owners. It's happened. There's people probably in this room that have been affected by that. Is that suddenly two more wells get drilled over here, and suddenly everybody's water pressure drops off, and they don't have sufficient capacity. So, in going through this process, that's part of the problem that I think is trying to be addressed here, is that the adjacent property owners were never notified that any action was taking place as far as dividing these properties. And according to what I just read there, they should have been notified, particularly due to the water situation.
They must be notified if the minimum safe yield drops below 3 gallons per minute. We asked the state whether they felt that was a factor for 2 parcels being added, which would add 2 home sites, and their response was no.
Is that in writing? Is that in writing?
All I can say is that, did the appellant share with you that it was invalid or that it was less than 3 gallons per minute?
But it's not in writing. So there's no, and that's one of the problems we've had on this case from the get-go, is that there were communications that took place that we were not allowed to see. They were apparently secret communications. I have a problem with that. The state code says that when the appeal is filed, the zoning administrator will turn over all the records, ALL, all the records forthwith, which means immediately. And they were requested, and the only things that we got that were considered to be the record, and this was determined by you apparently, was the letter from Mr. Brown and the determination letter from the zoning administrator. That was the whole record that they were willing to give us. There were communications that went on between the party, the staff, that we could not have privy to. And that, to me, is wrong. That is part of the record. And there's no place in the law that I can find where it says that the county administrator can make the determination on what the record will be, which is what you did in the email to me. You indicated that that was the record and that's all we were going to get. And okay, I have one more question, because it was also in the staff report, is that the letter of determination, which was being worked on at the November 6th Board of Supervisors meeting, that you went into closed session in order to discuss what you said you were going to talk about was 170 of the zoning code. In fact, according to the staff report, you talked about the letter of determination with the Board of Supervisors. Why was that done in closed session? There was no legal, really any legal aspects that needed to be talked about in closed session. That should have, you know, that's why the public didn't know anything about this, because everything seemed to be done behind closed doors. And we have 14 letters now, I think, and most of them reference the fact that why did this whole situation, this whole process take place with nobody's knowledge? And that's a question that the public wants to know the answer to that.
I'm sorry, you have a question about the case?
I have a question about information that is in the staff report on this case. Have you read the staff report? Okay, it's right in there. Do I have to read it to you? Okay. November 6th, 2023. The county attorney and the county administrator briefed the Board of Supervisors in a closed meeting, sharing a draft copy of the determination prepared by staff, and then in parentheses, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters. And in the, I believe in the information here, yes, this was in the motion to conduct a closed meeting from the county agenda for their discussion regarding potential amendments to the Rappahannock County Code, Chapter 170 zoning, in order to avoid potential future litigation. That was the wording that was used to go into closed session. There was no mention of a letter of determination there, but apparently we were anticipating future litigation on this letter of determination that was going to go out. And that's, why did that take place? And why did it need to be done in closed session? It should have been done in open session. Excuse me?
I appreciate your interest in the matter. The BZA is not here to determine when and where the Board of Supervisors goes into closed meeting.
And we have a very simple task tonight, and that is to decide whether the zoning administrator exceeded her authority in what she said and what she wrote, and B, the Board of Zoning Appeals is limited. We have no legislative ability. And all of this that you all brought tonight, please bring it to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission, both of you sides. That's not our purview. So would you like to make a?
Yes, I'd like to make the motion that the appeal of Sally Haynes be upheld. And in making that motion, I find that the zoning administrator acted beyond her authority, that the zoning administrator is authorized to administer and interpret the zoning ordinance and has no authority to declare a zoning ordinance unenforceable. That the zoning ordinance itself is a reasonable ordinance and should be given that we should give it that weight. It's clearly designed to protect the safety of the citizens of Sperryville and to protect the scenic landscape, which is one of the features of the comprehensive plan that we most value. Density allowances are not guaranteed. There are any number of reasons why somebody in an R5 can't develop the property to the extent that they may wish. I mean, it may be in a floodplain. It may be too steep. It may not have a 50-foot right-of-way. The other thing is that the notion that the 50-foot right-of-way has to be strictly construed is completely unreasonable. The zoning administrator and the Board of Zoning Appeals is supposed to interpret these ordinances so that they are reasonable. To say that we're going to go out and measure each road to see if it's 50 feet is totally absurd. So I don't buy that argument. Then the most important aspect of all of this, I think, is that there is an appropriate venue for changing this ordinance if you wish to do that. And that is the Board of Supervisors. And it may be that the Board of Supervisors is willing to change this ordinance. But in the meantime, neither the BZA nor the zoning administration, its administrator, have the right or the authority to legislate what this ordinance should be. That's my opinion.
And someone said tonight, the rules are the rules until they're changed.
Give me a second.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Is there some
second?
motion? I'd like to second it with a comment. It's been said many times, we're not a legislative body. I'm kind of offended that we get a rule that's so sloppily made. I think that it's incumbent upon the Board of Supervisors to make things clear and obvious, so we can make reasonable decisions. This is just, it's too vague. Michelle's decision, in essence, avoided the law. That's not her job. Our job, if we support her decision, that means we voided the law. We are not allowed to do that. This is the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors, and it's their responsibility, and I think that they ought to live up to it. And I second the motion.
Comment. We have to have a motion that's more concise. That's the motion is rambling.
I'm
And
sorry, you have to have a motion to what? Recap?
The motion was to support the,
No, that she kept going on and on. We have to know exactly what the wording
Oh, she was
is
just
of the motion. You made a whole lot of comments, but I had no idea where the motion stopped.
The motion is to uphold the appeal of Sally Haynes. The reasons, the other things that I was talking about was to make the findings which are necessary for upholding the appeal.
Right, but like I said, it was, to me, it was very hard. I had a really hard time following what you were saying, and that if we're going to have findings, which we
Ron?
have to have.
Ron, try this. Grant the appeal of Sally Haynes and overturn the zoning administrator's decision.
that's it.
That's it.
No, we have to have findings associated with that.
And then we have to have findings, yes.
Well, yes, that's what I said, but we have to know what the findings are. That's where also, we have to make sure that those are worded correctly. And that's what I'm, like I said, I don't know exactly what the findings are right now. And this, this may end up going into court, and so it's got to be very specific and worded. Usually in these situations, the motions are prepared in advance for that reason. But we haven't done that, but we need to do that before we vote on it, as far as the exact wordings on the findings.
We do have it.
We're talking about that form we're not letting it go through.
We do have him, well, then let's, it'd be good that we could see that.
Pass it on.
Yes, but we have to read this.
Okay.
Hey, you read it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. That's what we gotta do. You can't just let us read it and not let them hear it.
I'd be happy to read it.
No, I'll read it. I have no problems with that. Okay, motion, second. REZA 23-1201, appeals Sarah L. Haynes, reversing zoning administrator, I don't know what the SA stands for, but anyways, whereas Sally Haynes, appellant, has filed an appeal of the determination of the zoning administrator / subdivision agent, dated November 9, 2023, that the application of Rappahannock County Code 147-38 and 170-38A 6, the ordinances cannot be enforced because they create a manifest absurdity when they are literally applied, and because of this, the property with tax map 3859 owned by Mount Airy Field LLC property is eligible for subdivision without complying with these ordinances pursuant to other requirements of the county code. And whereas the Board of Zoning Appeals was duly advertised and has duly advertised and held a public hearing on February 28, 2024, and whereas the BZA finds that the appellant is aggrieved by the determination and timely filed her appeal, and whereas the BZA held a public hearing and received written and oral comments, and whereas the BZA has considered the information presented by the appellant, zoning administrator / subdivision agent, property owner, and comments submitted by the public, now therefore be it resolved that the Rappahannock County Board of Zoning Appeals grants the appeal and overturns the determination of the zoning administrator/subdivision agent and makes the following findings. 1, the zoning administrator/subdivision agent's determination is presumed to be correct. However, that presumption of correctness has been rebutted by a preponderance of the evidence presented and by that determination exceeding her authority. The zoning administrator/subdivision agent's determination that the ordinances require public right-of-way of exactly 50 feet in order to subdivide the lots of 25 acres or less, not at least 50 feet, is constrained and not a reasonable reading of the language of the ordinances, nor are the ordinances incapable of being applied. 3, the zoning administrator/subdivision agent has exceeded her authority by concluding that the ordinances are void and unenforceable, essentially voiding or nullifying the ordinances which are duly enacted by the Board of Supervisors and which the Board of Supervisors has not repealed or amended. Number 4, the BZA has received no evidence that the ordinances are inconsistent with state enabling legislation, that the Board of Supervisors would not otherwise authorize to enact them, or that they have been invalidated by a court. These ordinances, as legislative actions of the Board of Supervisors, are presumed valid and reasonable and carry a presumption of correctness. In any event, the BZA is not authorized to change county law or these existing ordinances or declare them arbitrary and capricious or void. 5, the BZA finds that the subdivision of the subject property into lots of 25 acres or less must comply with the requirements of the ordinances. And 6, the BZA renders no decision as to the application of any future ordinances or as to other provisions of county and state law that are not presented in the determination or appeal. And I would say we need a new motion to. I'll make a motion to accept this.
I move also.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? And the motion was made by Ron.
Right, Ron made the motion to accept the motion as he's just read as read.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call.
We've got 2 motions?
No, I seconded yours.
Oh, you just said you would make a motion.
Oh, no,
I'm sorry.
Can I call for a vote now? Ron?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm hearing things here that it's not
I think
correct.
it's a point of order, if I might.
Okay.
You have a motion by Ms. Ritter with a second by Mr. Teagle.
I've seconded it.
And now, at this point in time, either Ms. Ritter has to accept what Mr. McHale has read as her motion.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll work.
And Mr. Teagleman will have to second that acceptance
Okay.
before he
Want
can
to do
go
that?
and
Yep.
vote.
All right, you're
I
doing
accept
that?
this, yep.
Consider it done. I second.
Can I call for a vote? Ron?
Aye.
Bill?
I'm in favor of a separation motion. Aye.
And I. Thank you. Appeal is upheld.
Okay.
Right. It's like, yeah, I guess.
Thank you very much. I'm almost blind.
What?
I said 7, we don't get to make a law, we stand behind it.
No, I mean, it's, you know.
you know, let's get things written out in a clear way so we can enforce it.
Thank you.
Muddled crazy thing that's on the law comes off. It's got to be clear.
Right before you go, Ron.
Yeah, you got a vote to.
I guess we don't need to close. Yeah, I think so too. I agree.
It's the W.
What?
W.
W, yeah, William.
We do, right?
Thank you.
How's Don?
That's great.
Good.
And, you know, I said, who's this meeting? Not me.
I mean, I thought of that too, but I'm glad you got her on the list and you went to meeting. How did they do?
Her, she couldn't convince me about anything. She felt like we go I'm sorry, we are now going to adjourn. Forgot to do that one too. You have to excuse me, I'm kind of new at this gig.